Uh, I'm Jeff Halper, the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And this is going to be, it's planned to be the first of a monthly series of updates on what's happening in Palestine, Israel, on the ground. From here, that'll be a part of our monthly bulletins to all of you. Um, Members of ICAHD, people that associate with us, and activists in general, or people interested in the issue, you're all certainly welcome. And actually, it's important that you join in and become active on this very important issue. What's happening now, of course, we don't have time to get into everything. This is supposed to be a short update. Um, is obviously a whole upheaval, both in Israeli society and in consequence, I guess, in Palestinian society, certainly in the occupied territory. You know, in a way, they're not connected because Israel sees itself as a self-contained unit. Israel is Israel. It's a liberal European state. It's a democracy, and it's focused on Europe and the United States with its back, including with a wall, of course, to the Palestinians and the wider Middle East. It does not see itself, certainly, as a part of the Middle East in any way. And so, uh, you know, we have our own internal Israeli discussions about democracy. And what's happening in Israel is very interesting because it's happening in Europe and the US as well. And that is this real push of international right wing organizations to really change the international landscape in terms of right wing politics. What I mean is, you've got groups like the Federalist Society in the United States, the Cato Institute in the United States, certainly American evangelicals, um, together with all kinds of groups in Europe, the Brexit people, in a way, certainly Le Pen, the very right wing circles in Poland and Hungary around Orban, the Visegrad group, as it's called, of Austria, Meloni in Italy, and they're all connected. They're not separate sorts of things. And there's a very concerted campaign um, led by European and American right wing organizations to change the whole face of democracy, basically, in the world and to pursue a right wing agenda. And Israel's become very caught up in that. In fact, Netanyahu and his people are really leaders in this effort. And so what's happened in Israel is that with the new government that only came in 3 months ago, the Netanyahu government with these right wing extremists like Ben Gvir, who's the head of the police, and Bezalel Smotrich, who really runs the civil administration, the government of the West Bank, and other right wing people in the Likud party and so on. There's been a real push to try to push this right wing agenda onto Israel, and that is what's called judicial reform, which is completely changing the democratic regime in Israel to the degree that Israelis, again, as a self contained unit, see Israel as a democracy, a liberal European democracy. The idea is, of course, to neutralize the Supreme Court and to give politicians, and particularly politicians of the right, because the Israeli electorate has moved very much to the right in the last decades, to really give them a completely unhindered ability to run the government with no legal constraints, no constraints of the courts, and so on. And this is what happened in Poland. It's happened in Hungary. It's happened in Turkey, and certainly in the United States, there's a push towards that. Certainly with the Federalist Society in the United States, and so Israel's caught up in that. What it's done is it's created a huge fracture in Israeli society because according to the polls, 60 to 70% of Israelis, when that includes maybe up to half almost of the people that vote for the Likud, for Netanyahu's party, are opposed to this change in the democratic system within Israel. That's brought hundreds of thousands of people out in the street. And what's important from our point of view isn't that in particular, but that even though the focus is on democracy and on Israel, they can't avoid the issue of, well, how can you really be an occupation, a democracy with an occupation? I mean, how, and so what's happening also, we're in Ramadan now, and with the new extreme Netanyahu government with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, there's a heightened uh, um, repression of Palestinians in the occupied territory. We see it on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We see it with the rise in demolitions on the ground. We see it in the rise of killings of Palestinians and of settlement expansion. Smotrich, who again runs the civil administration, which is the governance of the West Bank, that decides on settlements and land expropriation and demolitions and so on, announced this week that the civil administration will double the Israeli settler population in the West Bank in the next, at least in the next 10 years, if not before then. So Israel is in a process of mopping up. It believes it's defeated the Palestinians. They're disorganized. The Palestinian Authority, of course, has become a collaborationist regime with Israel. So there's no pushback in any way. And that the road is free for Israel to completely repress the Palestinians, quietize their resistance, and basically impose its apartheid regime over the entire country. So even though we haven't succeeded over these years in ending the occupation or liberating Palestinians or Palestine, or getting to any kind of political arrangement like a two-state solution, or what ICAHD supports is a one-state, a one democratic state political program. Even though we haven't managed to do that, what I'm trying to say is the connection exists, that the repression of Palestinians and all those implications of really a right-wing Israel creating one state de facto, although an apartheid state, has become, in the context of these discussions inside Israel on democracy, has become an issue. Because as people just begin to sort of think about democracy, they're hit. Even the people that are on the right wing, that are trying to defend these judicial reforms and talk about democracy, they're also hit with this contradiction between Israel as a democracy and an apartheid regime that's extending and really nailing down its permanent presence over millions of Palestinians. So what I'm saying is there are cracks here that are beginning to develop that don't have to do inside Israel, particularly with Palestinians, but that are open to that are opening more and more the discussion about what kind of a state is Israel. Is it really a democracy? Can you be a Jewish democracy? What about the millions of Palestinians that it looks like are going to be under permanent Israeli control? Can you have an apartheid democracy? All these questions that have been very quiet and really in the background, in the dark, all these years in Israel are now coming to the surface with the protests against the right-wing government. So in a sense, what I'm saying is the Netanyahu government has opened a Pandora's box. And that even though it has nothing to do with Palestinians in particular, that linked with the repression and with the imposition of this apartheid regime is beginning to create cracks that I think are exploitable by us as we begin to try to, both internationally and here domestically, begin to think and to advocate for some kind of a political solution. The problem is, and this is the fatal weakness on our side, on the peace and justice side, is that even though ICAHD, and ICAHD is a part of the One Democratic State campaign, which is a Palestinian-led organization for one democratic state, even though we're a part of that, and I've written a book about it, and we have a detailed program about what one state would be like, it hasn't yet become accepted even by Palestinians, let alone Israelis. So the problem is that as this space opens up for even Israelis to become more critical, and as space opens up for the international community to be more critical of Israel, which is happening even in governments, um, we're not able to exploit that right now because we don't have that one state alternative or any alternative at our fingertips that we can say, okay, here's where you can go. Here's where, if you don't like what's happening now, here's where we can go. And that's missing. And so everybody's kind of floundering. People know that this is an unsustainable situation, unsustainable. It's unjust. It's beginning to fall apart and unravel to some degree, but no one knows where to go. And that's where ICAHD is working very hard with the One Democratic State campaign to begin to mobilize Palestinians, as many Israelis as we can, anti-Zionist Israelis, and internationals behind this one state idea. So in a sense, the question really becomes then, well, so what can we do in this situation? And as I sort of laid out, there really isn't a lot to do right now. We have to keep doing what we're doing, and that is highlighting Israeli violations of human rights, highlighting Palestinian suffering, highlighting Palestinian rights, of course, trying to pursue all kinds of directions in international law, continuing with BDS, continuing with all the campaigns we have. But right now, we're not yet at a place where we can step up to the plate and say, all right, here's a political program that we're advocating for. So we're not quite there yet. So one thing we'll have to do that I think is important in the absence of a political program is to begin to push the UN more, and the Palestinian authorities actually called for this, to set up an international protection force for Palestinians in the occupied territory, in the West Bank and Gaza, and East Jerusalem, actually, which is really important because the Palestinians need to get that space. They need a space to get themselves together to be able to come together behind a political program. But that's very hard for them to do under the pressure of Israeli apartheid, the Israeli army, demolitions, the police, and Smotrich, and so on. So a protection force would not only protect Palestinians from this increased Israeli repression, but at the same time, it would also give them that political space in order to be able to sort of come together around a political program. So that's that's in a sense, where I see where we are today. ICAHD there's a lot of fronts and there's a lot of campaigns and a lot of issues and so on. I would encourage you all, especially those of you that aren't members of ICAHD, to look at our website, ICAHD.org, ICAHD.org, the International Committee Against the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, a website, because we have a tremendous amount of resources on the website. Publications and maps and films and articles and updates, current updates of what's happening on the ground. It's a very rich resource that you should all use in your political work. So I'll leave it at that for the month of April, and we continue the struggle. So we'll be in touch. Goodbye.